All right, day 3, here we are. We continue our pastor's devotional series for today. You can see I've moved around different chairs in my office, different views. And I'm not moving around in the Bible at all today. This week, we're all in Matthew 13. I'm taping all of these devotionals on the same day, so I'm not moving shirts. I'm not changing shirts. I'm just changing a view to sort of get a different perspective on these parables. So this week, Matthew 13 is a chapter comprised of almost all parables. Really, the only thing that's not a parable is there's a couple explanations of parables that are there. And we're not going to cover those. I'd invite you to go and to read those. So we've looked at a couple already. Parables are oftentimes short kind of stories or snippets of information. It's talking figuratively, symbolically, metaphorically about this subject so that we might better understand this other subject. So when Jesus is talking about weeds and wheat being pulled, like we saw yesterday, he's not really talking about weeds and wheat being pulled. He wants us to make the symbolic, the metaphorical leap to know that he's talking about faithful and unfaithful. That's the weeds and the wheat. So Jesus often talks in these parables, and it has given the church 2,000 years worth of opportunities to discuss exactly what do these parables mean. Now, a couple times Jesus explains them. Most often Jesus doesn't. And so then it is left up to us to explain. And through the years, we've explained them in multiple different ways. All of those ways that we would explain them, I would argue, are right. I mean, when you read the scripture, what is God telling you? And then check that against 2 or 3 other people who are also reading the scripture to make sure that you're going in the right direction. And that's a perfectly valid interpretation. Especially of the parables, where I might think it means one thing and you might think it means something else. And you know what? A year from now, we might switch our 2 opinions in terms of what it is meaning and talking about. And that's okay. That's the beauty of the biblical text. That's the beauty of Jesus using parables. So the parable for today, Matthew chapter 13, verse 31, the parable of the mustard seed. He put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that someone took and sowed in the field. It is the smallest of all the seeds, but when it has grown, it is the greatest of shrubs and becomes a tree so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. All right. So let me point out a couple of things here. One, mustard seed is a brush. It's a bush. It never grows into a tree. Now, it's a bush large enough that birds can find their way in the branches. But why it's called a tree, and actually there's lots of kind of study about this passage and why Jesus would have called it a tree. And actually early transcripts, that was not there. What was there is that birds of the air could come and make nest in the shrub because it's so large, but it didn't actually say that it was a tree. And the belief is that later redactors wrote that in because if we're talking about kingdom of heaven, then don't we go back to the Garden of Eden? And wasn't the tree, right? Tree of knowledge, the good and evil, isn't that the place of the kingdom of heaven? And so this idea that somehow a tree is the factor that ties all of this together, somehow made its way into this parable. It's just an interesting little tidbit. So it's not a tree, it's a bush, but it's large enough that certainly birds could come and make their nest in this tree. The mustard seed actually means somewhere between, on the large side, maybe as much as like 10 feet high would from this little tiny seed. If you've ever seen a mustard seed or ever tried to work with mustard seeds, very, very small. So How out of something so small could come something so great? I mean, that's really the question of the parable, right? I think I think it means multiple things. It doesn't take for you to have much faith for God to be able to work something good and great and marvelous in your life out of the littlest of seed. God can work something great in your life. Sometimes from the most seemingly innocent or maybe sometimes even insignificant places, we learn the most. It seems like nothing, but yet it blossoms into something wonderful. I can think of my days of youth ministry. How many lessons I still carry with me that were taught to me by high school students and junior high students. I was a college student doing youth ministry, supposed to be teaching and mentoring these kids, and just how many of them and the stories that I carry in life were taught by those young people. Young people who far too many times in our world are considered too young, too small, too inexperienced, inconsequential, but yet God has done something marvelous and magnificent in my life by giving me this body of teaching that they gave to me. Think of the children in your life and the way God has used them to increase your faith. Think about, sometimes we are, we're not sure if we give the food drive, I'm going to, come to the food drive and I'm going to bring a couple cans or a bag full of food, but does that really make a difference? Does that really, hunger and poverty are ruining our world. And my bag of groceries, does that really make a difference? And sometimes we can count ourselves short. Or sometimes we can decide not to do it because we feel like our contribution isn't enough. Well, you know what? Your bag of groceries, you know who that made a difference to? And it made all the difference to the mom or dad who stood in the food line to get that bag of groceries so that they would have some food to give their children tonight. To them, it might feel like an expansive plant, life-giving. To you, it's just a little tiny thing. I don't know if it matters. The contributions that you can make, they matter. And they matter because when we're willing to make them, God can multiply our contribution. So as we go today, think about where is it that you could give something of faith so that God can multiply it? Where is it that someone else has given something that might have seemed like nothing or insignificant, but God certainly multiplied it into your life? Thanks be to God. Have a good day.